I'm so excited right now to be joined by Ashley Stahl. She is a counterterrorism professional turned career coach, among many, many other things. How are you doing today?
I'm so excited to be here. I'm doing great.
Well, thanks for coming on. We're just going to dive right in. How does someone know they are on the right career path or doing the job that's right for them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd said in one of the TED Talks that I gave that there's a lot of reason for why our gut is called our second brain, with more than 200 million neurons. Our gut, it literally has the intelligence of a cat or dog's brain. And so I think there's something really intelligent to when our stomach sinks or when we feel pulled towards something or a nudge towards something. And a lot of the times we're just disconnected from ourselves. And I think that's where the real work is.
Wow, I didn't even think about the gut perspective on diving into a career field, but it totally
Yeah.
makes sense. We listen to our gut with many decision-making processes, so why not our careers?
Yeah, there's a big difference between how something feels mentally and how something feels physically. I've had so many clients come into my career coaching practice or take one of my courses or read a book that I've written, and they've told me they have a job offer and they're really excited about it. And mentally, there's so many different boxes that the offer will check. But when I ask them, well, how do you actually feel about doing this job every day? A lot of the times people say, oh, well, not so good, but it's a means to an end. It's going to get me somewhere. And what they miss is that habit of thinking of this is going to get me somewhere, those years that you put in to tick a box or to get enough years on your resume or LinkedIn profile, those become your life. And that becomes a habit of being and a habit of thinking that costs you your own fulfillment. And so I think it's important today to take a look at how do you actually feel? How are you doing really? And there's two core dynamics that I think exist in anyone's career. And it's the first thing I look at as a career expert. The first thing is the what, meaning what are your skills? Where are you gifted? What's your zone of genius? That has to do with how you're using your mind, your body, and your heart throughout the day. That's why the argument in my book and in my work is not so much about following your passion. My argument is don't do what you love, do what you are. Because I think when you do something where you have a natural gift, you're not pushing a mountain, you're not pushing a river, you're being you, and the world is responding and rewarding you for it. So that's the first half is really the function, the responsibilities you're doing versus what you're interested in. You might have an interest in sports or fashion. That's an excellent backdrop, but you need to first focus on where are you gifted. So that's the what. And then I think the second piece is the how. The how has to do with your core values. That, given that we know that 50% of people leave their job, if not more, with the pandemic because they don't like their boss, what we can assume to be true is that how your job looks matters just as much as what your job is. And knowing that, we can take a look at our core values. Do you value balance? What does that mean to you? Really defining that. Do you value achievement? What does that mean to you? Growth. Really taking a look at the non negotiable principles by which you live your life. And a common mistake that people make when they self evaluate, and this is something I hear from a lot of readers of my book, is that they struggle to self identify their own core values because they tend to pick words that represent who they want to be more of versus who they actually are. So it's really important when you choose your core values, whether you read my book or you Google a list of them, that you're able to really say, are these words indicative of who I am in my core versus who I want to be? Who you want to be is useful, but who you actually are, those core values are the filters for your yeses and your nos. So let's say your core skill set is words and you know that you're really good at communication. I would say that's the what, right? The what of what responsibilities you're going to be great at. The second piece of that is to take a look at, are you introverted or extroverted? Do you want to express that responsibility internally or externally? Do you want to be in front of people or behind a laptop? These are the things to ask yourself. And then from there, what does the job setup look like? And that comes back to your core values. Is it work from home? How much time can you spend around someone given that you're introverted or extroverted? So these are some of the core facets that I really look at when somebody is taking a look at who they are and why they're actually happy or not.
Super interesting and definitely great to know that you really need to be in touch with who you are and yourself, just as we need us to be in all other aspects of our life. Super important in our career fields too. So thanks for sharing that. You mentioned talking about a means to an end for a job. Do you encourage people? There used to be this old standard of either go after a job you're passionate about and you probably won't make a lot of money, or go after a job that you're going to make a lot of money, but you won't be passionate about. Do you feel like there's still those two divides now, or have we conquered a new level in the career field?
I don't even know if it's a new level in the career field as much as a new level of someone's own consciousness. The truth of the matter is that there are many jobs out there, and times of crisis are actually huge times of innovation. And no matter how good or bad you perceive the workforce to look, companies are always innovating and always hiring. And there's especially room on top for you to thrive and do well. People always mistake and believe that, you know, because there's a lot of people doing marketing, that they're just like everyone else, when really there's always room on top for you to shine. And so I think that the belief that anyone has that they have to suffer to participate in the workplace or to thrive financially, I think is outdated. The truth is, you can take a stand for the you can do work that really lines up with who you are, what your gifts are, and get paid to be you. And I think that's really where fulfillment is. I think one of the misunderstandings in the workforce is that, you should love your job. I think your job and your career is a place that you can go to contribute. You can go to use your gifts and make the workforce better, make the world better. And I think a lot of people put the pressure on their career to fulfill their passion or their calling, when your purpose or your passion and your calling can be something that's much deeper than just your job. And while I get that we spend 90,000 hours of our waking time on this planet, that's 2/3 of our waking time at work. I get that we want to make it count. We want to make it mean something. And yet, I think that there's a way to look at it differently and not put the pressure of it being your purpose. I always tell clients or people who listen to my podcast that the secret to really loving your career is asking yourself, number one, are you growing? Is it sharpening a core skill set that you have that you want to grow and harness in the workforce? And number two, is it honoring your core values? Like, maybe you're using a skill you want to grow, but maybe you're a salesperson and that's the right role for you, but you're selling something you don't believe in, and integrity is a core value for you and it's violating a core value. So I think really taking a look at the harmony between where your gifts are and what matters to you as principles in your life is really that starting point, kind of going back in our conversation to that.
Yeah, for sure. Say you want to go after a new career, but you studied one and it's not turning out how you wanted. How can you make that pivot into a new career, maybe without any experience?
Yeah, I think it's really important to look at the past of what you've done before, and find the common thread between the past and the future of who you want to be. Every job is going to have an entire rainbow of different skills that you've used. And so even if you've used only 10% of your time in your last job in a skill set that's very relevant for your next one, tune into that 10% so that when you communicate about your experience, you're able to really highlight your relevant experience, where you've really made an impact. I think far too often people list their job duties as if it's a pie chart of what they've done, and they list it on their resume like it's a bunch of tasks, versus highlighting their relevant experience, really taking a look at what have I done that's relevant and how can I communicate it about it in a way that makes sense for where I'm headed.
So it also sounds like when you're applying to these jobs that you can't just have one blanket resume for each one. It's like you need to customize it for those jobs as well. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I still think that we live in a world where networking is really crucial, but absolutely, I also think that you can't really escape tailoring your resume. People feel it when you're just spraying and praying with your resume, and it's not going to resonate.
Spraying and praying. That's quite the phrase. I love it. Making the leap to a new job can also be super scary. How can one know or feel? I think you might have touched on this a little bit earlier, but that they're making the right move for themselves, because that's a really terrifying place to be.
I think that life is really an experiment and you need to be willing to take what you know and with the best of your knowledge move forward. And I think that anyone a fulfilling and successful career really has three lily pads is what I've found. The first lily pad is kind of what the majority of the workforce unfortunately chooses to be in, which is they're fine. And they're fine with being fine and maybe they don't love what they do, they like it enough or it pays the bills and they stay there. There's a certain population that swims from lily pad 1 to lily pad 2, which is where my work really is geared to take people in my books and my podcasts and more. That's about really figuring out where you're gifted and where your talents are. So if you're willing to swim from being fine to really finding your gifts, you need to go through an unknown and an experimental period. Clarity comes from engagement. It's never going to just come from thinking. You can't think, it's like rocking in a rocking chair, just thinking and ending up in the same place. Ultimately, a certain level of thinking got you to where you are. And as Albert Einstein has said in many of his quotables, you need to do something new to get somewhere new. That comes down to experimenting. So in order to get to that second lily pad, there comes a point where you need to say, this feels like it's aligned with my core skill set, and really understand your core skill set is a huge umbrella with many different options beneath it and many different ways of expressing yourself beneath it. And once you lock into a role that's using your gifts, people notice your magic because it's actually rare, unfortunately, to see someone in a role where they're really aligned with their skills. And you know it. If you think about your work right now or your team right now, you know there's one person that comes to mind where they're really shining because they're locked in with their skill set. And people always want to get, and that's the thing, a lot of research shows that the most talented and high impact person is the most burnt out person because people see how gifted they are and they want to give them more work because they can trust them to get it done with a lot of shine on it. And so I think going into that experimental period, trying things on, that gets you onto that second lily pad where you're working in your zone of genius. And from there, life becomes a game of opportunities. You start to sift between your yeses and your nos because once people start to see someone really talented, they start to ask them and offer them different opportunities. And the thing with opportunities is that they can be a very high form of distraction because sometimes opportunities are a yes for you. Other times they're just distracting you and they're not actually what you're meant for. So your job, when you get to that second lily pad and you finally have experimented enough to land in a role that's really using your skills and showing your gifts and your shining, is to be able to say yes to the right things for you, be a little more discerning about who you really are, what your values are, what your skills are, and how you want to be growing. And once you find that right opportunity, you have an opportunity to swim over to the third lily pad. And not everybody makes it there. I believe that that lily pad is kind of what they would call your dharma, your calling. And I've only been there once in my career. When I was writing my book, it felt like time didn't exist. Words were just flying through my fingers as I was typing for deadlines with my publisher. It was like this magical experience that was beyond me, and it felt like soul work. And I think a fulfilling life doesn't have to get you to that part where you're really doing your dharma. But I wish for everyone to at least have an opportunity to access that human experience. And I would say you really can't get there unless you're willing to experiment, to engage, to try on different things. And it doesn't mean you need to be reckless, you need to be thoughtful. But sometimes you need to make a choice. But yeah, I would say, just remembering that life is an experiment, life is a numbers game, and in a lot of the ways that we put pressure on ourselves in our career, it's almost like the equivalent of us saying to someone in preschool, your first crush, you better marry them, you better get it right. That's kind of how we are with our career. It's like your first job opportunity, you better love it and grow it, versus you are entering a portal of experimentation to find yourself through your work. If you're not willing to step into that quest, it's probably going to be a little less fulfilling than what you would want it to be.
Well, I now want this interview on the podcast to be encouraging people to jump onto their new lily pads. I've
Yeah.
never heard of that metaphor or example of what that looks like, and I really hope people are jumping on their new lily pads. That will be my new hope for coming out of this interview.
Me too.
You also mentioned some burnout, talking about how people can experience that, especially when they're really utilizing all of their skill sets. and it's something that exists in many career fields. How can one, and maybe that person who has honed into their skill set, avoid reaching burnout?
Yeah, this is an incredible question because the majority of the workforce is disengaged and burnt out. And I've never seen so many mental health challenges come into my work, whether it's through students in my programs or whatever have you. I think that burnout, in one way, is caused very much so by walking on a path that's not supposed to be yours for way too long. A lot of people are in resistance of who they are. And instead of looking at their job or their business, if they're an entrepreneur, and saying to themselves, I'm working in a skill set that's not my zone of genius, and I'm pushing a river, instead of saying, this isn't for me, they're pushing through and forcing themselves to be someone else. So that's one cause of burnout. I think another cause of burnout is what's very real. I mean, during the pandemic, Oracle had found through a study that the average American worker was doing an extra hour per day of work Monday through Friday. That's another part-time job. And if you look at who we were before the pandemic, the majority of the workforce was disengaged and burnt out from their jobs already. So add an hour a day of extra work and childcare and all of these demands that we got through the pandemic, you have a really burnt out workforce. And it makes sense that we had the great resignation, which now research is showing people are regretting leaving their jobs. Now they want the stability when we're looking at a potential recession. And whether or not that's going to happen, I think there's 4 core tenets of burnout that anyone can look at beyond walking on a path that isn't yours. And really realizing that when you are actually burnt out, and there's different levels of it, you are working out of a different brain. When you have true burnout, certain tasks that used to be easy for you become difficult because your brain literally looks different if you get a brain scan. One cause I think is a lack of community. A lack of there's so much research to show the power of having community and support. And if you don't have communal support, more often than not, that is a cause of burnout. Another part is a lack of sleep. And this is something that we talk about with Emily Aris on the U-Turn podcast. She's an expert on this, and she talks in this episode with me about these causes. Lack of sleep is a very obvious part of the human experience that a lot of us go through, but it is crucial, and it goes without saying that we need it. And a lot of people think that they can curb their sleep, stay up late, but eventually we all crash. We all get burnout. Another piece is a lack of purpose. It's really hard for today's worker to do work without feeling like it has any sense of meaning in the world. I remember Karl Marx when at the wake of the Industrial Revolution, he talked about how, factory workers people going from building an entire chair to just being in a factory, focusing on something like the leg of a chair, a leg after a leg after a leg. It was kind of the end of fulfillment of having a complete project or seeing the full purpose or fulfillment in your work. If I think if a lot of people in today's workforce feel like they're just a piece of a puzzle and that what they're doing doesn't matter, eventually there's a sense of burnout to that. I think we're all wired to feel like what we do counts. And there are ways, even though there's menial tasks in the workforce or even as an entrepreneur, there are ways to make sure that your team or you feel motivated. And then I think the final piece is a lack of agency. And this one is huge. And I heard a lot about this during the pandemic. Feeling a lack of agency or a lack of power. I had a client come into my private practice, and she was talking about she worked for a global cosmetics brand, and there were extreme shipping delays due to COVID. And so even though they weren't her fault, she was at the forefront of $1 million purchase orders, and only a $500,000 worth of product would make it to the client because there'd be a shipping delay on the other half. And she was taking the heat for that. That's a very perfect example of a lack of agency caused by the pandemic, caused by her workplace. And she wasn't being given resources by her workplace or tools to be able to deal with and navigate the unhappy customers. And it would eventually fall on her and cost her her own fulfillment. So if you have a lack of agency, a lack of purpose, a lack of sleep, a lack of community, or you're working on a path that really isn't meant to be yours, these are all signs that eventually burnout is going to hit you, and there's different levels. One thing to know is that there is disability programs for you if you are in a depression spiral, if you need mental health support, and you can get a psychiatrist or a doctor to sign off on you needing a medical leave of absence. And you have the right in most states not to have to share what that medical leave is and to take a certain percent, if not all, of your pay during a determined amount of time that you have off to recover. Employers can no longer get away with having you work for people's jobs because they had so many people quit during the Great Resignation and they didn't fill those roles. That can't go on you anymore. And right now we're hearing a term called the quiet quitters. And a lot of people think that term means somebody's ghosting their job, they're leaving without notice. But quiet quitters are actually the people who are quietly stopping the practice of overworking, of working beyond the scope of their role. And a lot of employers might think this is a bummer for them, but this is actually great news because people without quiet quitting are burning out and fully quitting. And so quiet quitters setting boundaries, I think, is a real healing tool for the workplace and the workforce, and is going to translate into a lot more happiness and satisfaction amongst workers and retention for employers.
Yeah, I'm glad you touched on that quiet quitting term. It's all over social media. And I think the younger generation has learned from our mistakes. And I love to see that. We talk a little bit about being in jobs that you love. If you're in that job that you love and you feel like you're stuck and you can't advance your career in that job you love, what are some tips or advice you may have for someone who's in that position? Because yes, getting out of a job and going to one is something, but also being in a job you love and just wanting to be promoted and
Mhm.
do something new is also a very real thing.
Yeah, I had a professor and researcher on the U-Turn podcast called, his name was Dan Cable, and he talked about how to feel more alive in your job. And he talks about this huge body of work called job crafting, which kind of sounds like Star Wars or something like that. But what's really powerful about it is it's kind of how you turn a bland job into a grand job. Job crafting is really the practice of asking yourself, what is my core skill set? And how can I initiate a project that helps me sharpen that superpower and that gift that is of high value to my employer? So that's one thing you can do on a personal level, something that you can add to your resume, add to your employer conversations if you ever search for a new job. The other half of your question around getting promoted, sometimes you need to be blunt and actually set up a meeting with your manager. And one mistake that a lot of employers make is that they're casual about it. They'll stop someone in the hallway and say, "Hey, I was thinking about my growth. You need to respect that you want to grow and set this up as an official meeting." So I would say, emailing your boss and saying, "Hey, I have some ideas about what's possible for the year ahead, and I would love to have a formal meeting with you to explore what's possible with this. Do you have any time in the following week? Let me know." That way, when you come to the meeting, you want to have a few things on hand. You want to have some bullet points of some accomplishments you've already had that you're really proud of, areas that you've maybe exceeded your job responsibilities in your job title, in your job announcement that you applied for way back when. And you want to have some ideas for the future. And maybe one of those ideas is job crafting. It's a project that you want to take on. It's a matter of the heart and it's something of extraordinary value. But what's important is that people don't just promote you because it's time to promote you. You get more because you're doing or giving more. And that more could be a vision. And so you really want to enroll your manager in a vision of what you see as possible for them and possible for you. So really set that time aside. Take some time before the meeting to really write down those achievements of the past, where you've exceeded expectations, what you think is a vision for the future, and be prepared to really enthusiastically show them what's possible. And from there, ask them, "Hey, if I'm able to achieve these things in the year coming up, are you able to revisit my salary? I did some research and this is the compensation level for this level of responsibility, and I would love to explore it." Talking about money is something that I think more people need to talk about as if they're ordering a sandwich at a sandwich shop, just very neutrally, because a market compensation rate is a number that's based on what your contribution is, and it's that neutral.
Wow, yes, I do believe that we should be talking about numbers more, even if it may be a little scary to share that about you and hear others, but it is an important tool to have for yourself in the long run. I do agree. We're talking about these different job aspects, how you can get into a job, how to leave a job, how to change careers. There's one hot topic, though, that I definitely want your opinion on. Do you feel that work life balance is a real thing? Because there are also people out there that believe, if you're not working, then your competition is. You gotta work harder and put on all these hours, talking about the burnout. It all goes hand in
Yeah.
hand. But can we find the best work-life balance and actually benefit us and our employers?
Okay, so work life balance has two core facets. I think the first piece is what you actually need on the outside, and the second piece is what does it really mean for you on the inside. For me, one really large breakthrough, especially being an entrepreneur, personal development, is looking past a lot of the extreme thinking that exists in the personal development space. For example, there's a quote like, you're either growing or you're dying." And I feel like that hustle culture really burns people out. The reality is, it's actually okay to just be okay. You can be maintaining, you can just be where you are. I think the second piece is to really take a look at, okay, if you're what does fine mean for you? What does great mean for you? What does balance mean for you? For me personally, I have usually months where I'm in a really strong spurt, and then I have months that I'm fully off. That's balance for me. I'm either going or I'm on a break. For some people, balance looks like 9 to 5. We also live in a time of poly work. This originally was started by the millennial generation, and they did it to keep the lights on, where they'd take multiple jobs and piece them together to pay the bills. Now, Gen Z has been using polywork more so as a way to express themselves and to look at all their nuances. So, what that looks like is saying to themselves, okay, what are the different facets of me? I want to work in the film industry. I want to do the creative side of things. What are 3 different jobs part time that I could do to deepen my understanding of this entire skill set and niche that I want to be in? And so that might be balance for them, is balancing what they're learning, how they use their time, what their hours are. So I think it's more important than ever to question that hustle culture and to check in with, what does balance and success really mean for you? And when you're learning from a guru or reading books, remember that you are your own expert. And while you can consider the opinions of others, you know you best. So tune into you and what you need.
Wonderful. I think that's such a great point for us to end on, as people can sit with that and think about their own lives and what they're doing with their career. So, Ashley, I just want to thank you so much again for joining me. It's been wonderful to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And I want you to shout out, you mentioned your book a few times. I'd love for you to shout that out and whatever else you'd want to shout out.
Yeah, thank you. I wrote a book on how to figure out your best career fit. It's called U-Turn, YOU, and it's 2 words: get unstuck, discover your direction, design your dream career. And then I also have a podcast called the U-Turn Podcast, also spelled YOU, turn. And I would love to have you on there.
Yeah, this was so much fun. I seriously thank you again for all of us out there who are struggling with our careers or happy and just need that extra push to get to a new lily pad. I appreciate it. Thank you again.
Thank you.